Imagine this. You're inside an embassy, surrounded by fellow activists. You've gathered to peacefully protest the brutal killings happening in your country. Then, suddenly, fire, smoke. The doors are locked from the outside. There is no escape. This isn't hypothetical. This was the horrifying reality for Rigoberta Menchú's father and 37 others who were burned alive in the Spanish embassy in Guatemala City. This is the story of a woman who lost nearly everything: her family, her home, her people, to a ruthless dictatorship. But instead of staying silent, she became one of the most powerful voices for indigenous rights the world has ever known. This is the story of Rigoberta Menchú Tum. What is going on, everyone? I'm Kevin Munoz. Today is Monday, March 17th, and welcome to the Leo Podcast, your go-to for insightful discussions on a variety of educational topics with a focus on issues impacting the Latin American community. March is Women's History Month, and for the rest of the month, we're highlighting incredible women from Guatemalan history. Leaders, activists, revolutionaries whose stories deserve to be told. Last week, in episode 121, we talked about Lady Cabell, the supreme warrior queen of the ancient Maya. But today, we're diving into the life and legacy of Rigoberta Menchú, the renowned Che Maya woman who became the voice of indigenous peoples worldwide. From surviving the brutality of the Guatemalan Civil War to winning the Nobel Peace Prize, her journey is one of resilience and relentless advocacy for human rights. Before we dive into this compelling episode, a quick shout out to our fantastic supporters at patreon.com/latinoamericaneo. If you want to support the podcast and help keep these episodes going, consider joining our Palomitas community. And for my patrons, I've got an extended version of this episode where we'll explore Rigoberta's deeper impact, her fight for indigenous rights, and how her story continues to inspire. So if you want more of this journey, well, you already know where to find it. But don't worry if you're not a patron yet, this episode is still packed with great content as usual. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the story of Rigoberta Menchú Tum, an unwavering force for justice and dignity. Rigoberta Menchú was born in January 9th, 1959 in Aldea Chimel, a small Mayan village in the Guatemalan highlands. She was raised in a world where indigenous communities faced systematic discrimination and economic hardship. Her father, Vicente Menchú, was a farmer and community leader who fought tirelessly for indigenous land rights. Rigoberta grew up witnessing the injustices her people faced, and from a young age, she was determined to make a difference. She traveled alongside her father, helping him teach rural campesinos about their rights and how to organize against oppression. But the Guatemala she grew up in was a country in crisis. The struggle for indigenous rights was not just about land, it was about survival. Guatemala's Civil War began in 1960, a conflict fueled by deep-rooted ethnic and socio-economic tensions dating back to colonization. The military dictatorship led by Efraín Ríos Montt and backed by wealthy landowners launched a brutal campaign against the Maya people. Entire villages were wiped off the map, families were torn apart, and mass killings became a horrifying norm. The statistics are staggering. Over 200,000 Guatemalans were murdered, 450 Mayan villages were destroyed, and 1 million people were displaced. The military's scorched earth tactics aimed to eliminate indigenous resistance completely. Rigoberta's own family was not spared. In 1980, her father and 37 other indigenous activists were burned alive inside the Spanish embassy in Guatemala City during a peaceful protest. Shortly after, the army captured, tortured, and killed her mother and brother. These horrific events solidified Rigoberta's resolve to fight for justice. At just the age of 21, Rigoberta fled to Mexico, leaving behind the land she loved, but carrying with her the voices of her people. In exile, Rigoberta refused to be silenced. She connected with human rights groups and began telling the world about the horrors happening in Guatemala. Her testimony shocked the international community, forcing them to acknowledge the genocide against the Mayan people. In 1983, she published I, Rigoberta Menchú, an autobiography that became a global sensation, exposing the world to the suffering of indigenous Guatemalans. Her book gave a voice to the voiceless and put pressure on governments to act. Then, in 1992, something remarkable happened. Rigoberta Menchú became the first indigenous woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. The timing was symbolic. While the Western world celebrated the 500th anniversary of Columbus's discovering America, Menchú's award was a stark reminder of the centuries of indigenous oppression that followed. Her win was not just a personal achievement, it was a victory for all indigenous peoples fighting for their rights. After winning the Nobel, Rigoberta returned to Guatemala and founded the Rigoberta Menchú Tomb Foundation to support Mayan communities and genocide survivors seeking justice. Through her foundation, she worked to preserve indigenous culture, provide education, and hold those responsible for human rights violations accountable. She played a major role in historical trials against former dictator Efraín Ríos Montt and other high-ranking officials responsible for mass atrocities. Her efforts helped bring justice to survivors, ensuring that their suffering would not be forgotten. In addition to her activism, Rigoberta became politically active, running for president in 2007 and 2011 as the leader of WINAQ, that's WINAQ, the first indigenous-led political party in Guatemala. Though she did not win, her campaign helped push indigenous rights into the national political conversation. Rigoberta Menchú's impact goes beyond Guatemala. She has worked tirelessly as a UN ambassador for the world's indigenous peoples, collaborating with international organizations to protect marginalized communities. She continues to advocate for justice, education, and cultural preservation. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of amplifying silenced voices, and the necessity of justice for those who have suffered unimaginable losses. As she once said, "Only together we move forward," so that there is light and hope for all women on the planet. Her fight is far from over. Her legacy will continue to inspire generations to come. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week as we highlight another incredible woman from Guatemalan history. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leo podcast for updates, and as always, thank you for tuning in, and a special thanks to our Patreon supporters for making this show possible. If you learned something new from this episode, please don't forget to follow, rate, and share the podcast. I'm Kevin Munoz. I'll catch you in the next episode. And as always, mi gente, stay informed and stay empowered.